time to hate whatever I am doing. It's all too late. All right, hi. This is Everything But the Kitchen Sink with Dr. Ava Pomrenk and me, Chris Kloss from Germany, and Ava is in Mexico. How are you, Ava?
I'm doing well today. It's the morning, the early morning. So it's a great topic for the early morning.
Yeah, here it's in the middle of the afternoon and bright daylight, and behind me you can probably see it. And yeah, and today we have a very delicate issue, to be honest. I found it delicate, at least. It's called "What's Wrong with Man?" And the I mean, it kind of grew over the course of the previous recordings, I think, when we started with dating and everything. And of course, with also a lot of personal experiences. And I also, I mean, even me from a male perspective, believe that something is not going so right. And of course, dating or getting to know the potential partner is a big part of this issue, but it also goes beyond of this, which we might also touch on, which is the basic emotional ability and being mature in those regards.
Mhm.
But I think it might be most fruitful to start with the whole dating game. And I believe that you have a lot of not so good experiences in that department.
Yeah, unfortunately. Um, I mean, I don't think it's just me. I get the sense that a lot of women are having a really hard time. A lot of women who are dating men are having a really hard time. Um, and have, especially and I think the past maybe decade in particular, noticed a trend in the direction of um, relationships between men and women in the dating context deteriorating. Um, women, well, I mean, for me, feeling like men are increasingly coming across as even more entitled. Um, Entitled in the sense of expecting to not have to show up with giving an equal amount of energy and effort, to not have to go through the whole process of getting to know me, and instead are very sex focused. It appears that they are feel pretty entitled to sex very early on in an interaction. Um, and it seems like basic agreements around how to engage in conversation and getting to know someone have been completely um, abandoned. So, for instance, just this basic agreement of like mutual respect, and then that's something that creates safety for um, the dating process and for a sexual experience to eventually evolve from that. Has it's not an automatic, like, common human decency sort of agreement in hetero dating these days.
Mm. So what
Um,
is, yeah? Oh, sorry, sorry, go ahead.
no, go for it.
Well, I was just wondering that so the first actual issue that comes up is the entitlement, or the alleged entitlement, or the self-proclaimed entitlement of man towards sexual intercourse with the woman that they're dating, or with women in general. And we talked before the talk a lot about incels as a background for a lot of things, and this is definitely one of them, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that at some point in the future, there will be some research that really tracks the fact that I think incel ideology has infiltrated online spaces, so social media and dating apps, has infiltrated it and influenced men in the direction of taking on more of some of these ideas or concepts as a way of existing. It's emboldened them. So um yeah, I don't see all men. I want to be clear that I don't see most men as being incels or self-described incels.
Mm,
um, but I do see how a lot of the main ideas in the incel philosophy around this idea that relationships are quite transactional and this heavy focus upon power um, and maintaining a sense of a hierarchy or men getting power back or the threat of women taking power from them. Um, Additionally, the sense of being entitled to sex if somebody, just as a part of being a man in relationship with women. Um, I see these as being, um, again, they were around before self-defined incel communities gathered, but I think there's um, there's a way they're being these experiences are or perceptions are being legitimized through groups of people collecting online and creating content or generating content and sharing it. Um, just the same way I think a lot of other radical groups, their ideologies are becoming more mainstream or more accepted or more taken as a reflection of reality or something
mm,
that could potentially be legitimate now when originally it used to be quite radical.
mm.
Yeah,
Well, yeah. And the so the entitlement to sex is one of the axioms from the in the incel community, I think, which already I would say defines a very extreme perspective, just deriving this entitlement from, yeah, from what? I don't know. I mean, do you know where they got this idea from, or I mean, other than that, it's one of the basic principles they're promoting, right?
I don't know where they get the idea from. Like I've not been able to locate where where it occurred to somebody and then it became officially an incel
Mm,
thing. But uh, I see that a lot of the men in the incel community are heavily isolated and really depressed. And there is this sort of, as with major depression, there is this sort of paranoia that comes about around like the world being against you or rejecting you in some way. That idea that a lot of people with major depression experience and a lot of isolation. You end up kind of in your own little world, perpetuating these beliefs about your unworthiness or your grotesqueness or um, how you're unwanted. And I do see this entitlement to sex as being kind of like a reaction to that, in a sense of feeling very touch deprived and feeling a sense of wanting to be a part of the dating community or wanting to be um, desirable to women or wanting to feel really good in connection with women, and feeling like somehow that's beyond your reach and not knowing how or why. Um, and I think it's the entitlement to sex is like a very distorted way of wanting to have a sense of belonging. And I think it ends up just getting focused on sex. So, and that's there's I think there's a misogynist or maybe patriarchal component here too. It's like men are heavily socialized to focus a lot of their sense of identity or well-being around sex. And then there might also be a biological component here too, because of testosterone. Like, I'm not really sure, but that's kind of
Sure.
how I see it. The entitlement to sex is like
Mm.
this shame-filled, rage-filled, pain-filled experience of uh, just wanting to belong and using the tools that, or the ideas that have been given to, messaging that's been given to men about belonging being based on sex, right?
Mm.
And then this sense of um, yeah, I think there's a lot of ways that people in privileged groups, which, you know, we all have layers of privilege in different ways, develop a sense of entitlement based on the power that's given just by virtue of being born into a certain body or circumstance or class or ability, right? So I think that fuels it too. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the background is where it really comes from, as the ultimate cause or reason. That's very complex
Yeah.
to figure out. I was just wondering if you knew if this in being, but because in being entitled to sex, I mean, this is definitely a rational idea. This is nothing that I would say somebody says out of a um, hormonally driven state. You know what I'm saying? I mean, sure. What's the difference? When does a hormone or a transmitter in our brain turn into an actual thought? We don't know that yet.
Mhm.
I was just wondering if there's like historically something else or something similar. But I think we incels itself is not the core topic, although they are providing a lot of background, because what you're saying, the feeling of being entitled to a sexual intercourse with the woman or the opposite is um, is also true for the normal guy, right?
Yeah.
So so maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that one, because from my male perspective, this is really something that, and there might be also difference between Germany, maybe even Europe, compared to the Americas or the United States. Because I have never heard a guy in my environment, um, obviously and very clearly, even if you just had to interpret it, stating that he considers him or herself as being entitled for sexual actions. And I'm not saying that it's not there. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I never heard these guys portraying this attitude. And at the same time, I have to admit, I heard women telling stories that guys do not react very well if they have been apparently rejected on those sexual bases.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think most men will come right out and say, I am entitled to sex.
Mm,
Um, but it's demonstrated in their actions or their reactions, or, you know, some of the language that they use, or the coercive way they approach escalating into a sexual experience. And then when you deny them,
mm,
they I've had several adult men like throw tantrums, being denied. Tantrums in the sense of just like really emotionally being unwell, just imagining the fact that sex might be delayed further, or any sexual experience might be delayed. You know, where they're not getting to be in control of the pace with which
hmm
something escalates. Um, and then calling me controlling, when it's more like, do you want to have a sexual experience where both parties are interested in what's happening? Because this is not making it seem like you do.
Mm.
But yeah, so I mean, when you say I've not seen men tell me about how entitled they are, like I do wonder if it's just the same way that like my privilege as a white person makes it that so I'm like I'm basically blind or deaf when it comes to how to perceive when somebody of color is dealing with a microaggression or dealing with oppression or dealing with unreasonable behavior
Yeah.
from white people like me, right? So, it's I do
Yeah.
I,
So,
I have a question about that or curiosity.
yeah. I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from here, and I was just trying to think of situations where um, I don't know how to put this. Um, Yeah, I mean, sure. If you're, I can see it from the point that when you're in a dating situation or approaching a woman, and it goes well up to a certain point, and which also plays into this whole issue, like, okay, just because I've been nice to you once doesn't mean that I want to have sex with you from the female perspective, which is also a huge issue.
Mhm.
And maybe it's along those lines because I can remember at least one incident when I had a real nice encounter. It happened by accident, and she didn't want to go to the hotel that night, uh, and I was internally frustrated, and then I was wondering after that, okay, there's a second. I remember two incidents where it basically happened like the same pattern. And then after I thought about it, it made me angry in a sense that it didn't happen. And when I thought about it, I realized that what 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 caused the anger on my end was that I felt the situation is would then be kind of dead. I mean, of course, if you meet again. So with one of those two women, I met again, and we met intentionally. I mean, it was a little bit like an unwritten rule because you sense that there was mutual attraction and everything, and otherwise, I'm pretty sure she probably also would not have agreed on a second date.
Mhm.
Um, but and with the other one it didn't happen, but for several reasons. Um, but the I noticed that in the aftermath of those occasions, that I was more angry about destroying the flow of the situation from my perspective, which also now plays into the whole biological issue, maybe. So maybe biology might be in the back of this entire then socially constructed idea, because it is an idea. Entitlement is definitely nothing that biology puts out there. I mean, because it's a formal term, it's an abstract concept, right? Being entitled to whatever it is. But when you think about the archetype of the hunting gene from a male perspective,
Mhm.
and you portray this or put this onto a normal dating situation in a little bit rough terms, you could say, or basic terms, you could say, here's the hunter, which is the guy. Here's the prey, which is the woman. And this, of course, also raises up another question. Why do we have these roles? Because
The
this is very
of the hunter
widespread.
and the hunted.
Yeah, exactly. Or the active and the passive, or the giving and receiving. Uh, I mean, those stereotypes, right? It's
Yeah.
very strongly out there. And when you look on platforms, I mean, we've talked about dating in our first talk. and dating apps. But when you look at other platforms, it's so obvious that this old idea, I mean, I call it an old idea, of this active passive, at least active passive. I think that would be the least denominator I would agree on. Um, is there. It's just there. Okay. So and I wonder if maybe biology does play a role here, because I'm not saying that eye level is not possible if you have this sort of roles given, right? You can still meet on eye level, but the roles are different. And I could imagine, this is just a thesis here, that when the male gets into a situation in which he wants to, there's a good German word for this. I cannot really translate in English right now because I
Just
don't
say it
know
in
it.
German.
Huh?
Just say it in German.
Erlegen, which is because it's killing essentially, but it's a very it's yeah. But erlegen more implies not the matter of the death of the prey, but it more the gain of the prey. So you gain something, okay? So what the male in a dating situation wants, he wants to win the woman.
Yeah.
That's the point. And that's what the term erlegen points more into. Although in hunting situations, of course, the killing eventually is the main goal. But since it's not about life and death here, that doesn't apply. Okay, so
Well,
what
can
I'm
I
sure, go
say
ahead.
something about, so what I find really interesting is if we look at this from the perspective of just a biological desire to hunt, why is it that the hunting is coming more from like an exploitative, extractive position, right? Like it, rather than a hunting of like, oh, I'm going to wife this person, like I'm going to hunt this person and court them and like, and win with getting into a relationship, right? Like it's interesting how it's like, I'm going to hunt and I'm going to take something from you. I'm going to get a pleasurable experience from you or a status oriented experience from you through sex. I'm going to feel so great about myself. And then I'm going to leave and go to someone else.
Yeah,
So
this is
it's interesting,
yeah.
like, why not do the hunt? Why are men not doing the hunt in terms of connection? Instead, it's like, I'm going to focus on like this physical act and remove it from like the fact that these physical acts usually engage the attachment system and actually get us attached to each other. But there's like a fundamental, I feel like at this point, a fundamental disconnect a lot of men have where like they're so wounded that they don't properly know how to attach to someone. So it's like when you take that away from somebody internally, then sex can be treated like this exploitative, extractive experience that's strictly just for you, rather than acknowledging the relational attachment component. But it's
Yeah.
just interesting, even the way that you're framing it is like, well, men are just created to hunt. Okay, well, why is it that they're not hunting for a relationship or a connection or like an emotional experience? Why is it they're hunting in regard to sex? And I recognize there's like this whole argument of like men need to plant their seed and have children with as many women as they can. And it's like, that also doesn't really make sense and hasn't made sense in a while, because if a man has children with a lot of different women, that's a huge amount of obligation and responsibility. Like that's going to make life, I don't know, there's some part of it where I'm like, why are we still using this argument? Because I don't think it's sex just for the purpose of planting your seed, because I think sex is so completely divorced for a lot of people from reproduction at this point. And I find it hard to believe that a biological drive is so strong that that's still what's going on, right? So anyway, like I just had to put that in there.
Yeah, sure. And I can totally understand why. I think though you're mixing two things, not up, you're bringing two things together that I would divide or
Okay,
look at separately from an analytical point of view.
okay.
Of course, it all goes together, but analytically, we have to differ between the biological drive and what social and socialization means. I think the biological drive is really that strong, and the difference is very easy, I would say,
Hmm.
just from biological perspective. The orgasm as a climactic experience, as like the gratification which would stand at the end of this hunting
Hmm.
is, I would say, in its intensity and in its um, climactic, which always already implies a punctual, one moment at a time, explosion of all sorts of hormones like gratification and happiness and fulfillment or whatever,
Mhm.
aside from the fact of yes, I won, um, can cannot be competed with because of its exceptionalism, so to say. So it is, from the experience, very, very standalone what's going on in your brain when you're having an orgasm compared to what's going on in your brain when you're really happy in your relationship.
Huh.
So from the biological perspective, I'm pretty sure if you measure somebody's brain when they're having an orgasm, then like it's fireworks all over the place for 10 seconds. And being happy in a relationship is a total different ball game.
I think I think women have that experience too. And there's also evidence that women's orgasms are probably even better than men's.
I have no reason to doubt that, but
So it's like,
but
why are women not just hunting then?
yeah, this is actually a very good question, and I mean, since we're talking from the biological perspective, and this is just I have to underline here, this
Mhm.
is just a model of thinking, right? Because
Mhm.
we cannot right now say what would happen if we cut out socialization. It's hard to tell, you know.
Yeah.
Or is socialization, because that's there also, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked a little bit, but just for the sake of completion, is socialization so strong that it actually alters behavior also? Because I've seen women saying things from the bottom of their heart. No, that's not how I think. I'm different. I'm not interested in cheating because I want this man and stuff like this. And he feels them like family and whatever. And although some studies point in different directions, she feels
Mhm.
deeply from the bottom of her heart that's not how she is, and she's different. So we don't know.
Mhm.
Um, what I'm saying is that maybe testosterone is the answer from, again, from the very biological perspective. And I also want to feed in here another very important side note. That doesn't, because I'm bringing up these arguments, doesn't mean that I think that's how it should be, and that
Yeah.
being entitled is legitimate.
Yeah.
Because if we talk, so it's just for analytical purposes, just for understanding what's going on. Because if I was like that, I would also agree with, yeah, who needs a constitution and law and the order of law, the rule of law? Let's just like go back to being the Bavarians, and the stronger one wins. No, I mean, this is what makes us different from an animal, or from
Mhm.
how we were back then, because we thought, or we think, we're
Mhm.
better than this.
Mhm.
And um and and I think here we are entering the actual interesting context, because there might be something. Okay, let's just say for a second, or assume for a second, that the biological drive is true, and it happens, and it's something that is within man. Okay, now from modern enlightenment perspectives and gender equality and so forth, and everything that we gained, at least in our realm of culture, how the sexes communicate and get along with each other. I don't see that this now can be a legitimate um, um, for deriving an entitlement out of this. Because, like you said, something seems to be going wrong. I mean, and now the question is, what is going on with those men that they are not aware of this drive in so far that they are saying this is actually something that's probably going against the limits of the woman.
Mhm.
They apparently they cannot say it. Even worse, and I think this is just a real cop out, because when I look through, for example, what all the incels are, what their ideas is, which can be applied to probably a lot of other men. um, I think we're getting at the core of that point, because what these guys are basically saying is that it's not my fault, the other, the surroundings, the society, people, and what is it like? Yeah, like they even have conspiracy theories about that they're being isolated and stuff like this. I think it's just a very, very cheap cop out for that you are not really in contact with yourself,
Yeah.
and being able to connect. Because of this ability that's lacking, you're not able to connect with the opposite that you're talking to, be it other males or women. But with women it gets more apparent, because here, because we're talking about an emotional connection also, it's not about just sex. I mean,
Yeah.
these guys probably want women just to be holes on two legs, but that's not what it is. I mean, you're a human being, right? And and I think that they're overseeing their initial drives, and they're misinterpreting this maybe as an entitlement, but I think it's also a cheap cop out, because before I look into myself, what my role is, I can also just claim that there's a rule that entitles me to anything. Well, great, but that doesn't really give you any points on you as a person,
Yeah.
or as a character, right?
Yeah. I mean, this whole conversation, I want to be clear from my end that I feel like it's not just the past 10 years that there's been something wrong with men.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely, definitely.
this is just, it's not like sexual violence or violence against women has only existed in this time period, and then men were great before then. But, there's like a very interesting sort of dysfunction that I'm commenting on here, where I'm like very curious, and I think we're both trying to get at it, like what what is going on with men in this immediate time, like this immediate time in history, where um, men are having such a hard time making connections, and um, have sufficiently become so isolated and so disconnected from themselves that it's easy to other women and make them into these objects. And while not like being grounded enough in um, feeling the implications of the statements they're making or the beliefs they're upholding, right? Like it's easy to imagine killing someone if they're not human to you, right? And I think it's the
Yeah,
same, it's like the same thing happening here, right? Like if you are deeply disconnected from yourself, if you're deeply dissociated, if you're in a highly anxious, depressive state, and you're getting really removed from reality, like the norms of relating socially, and you're just living in this like alternate world of your own, and other people are reinforcing it with you. Um, it is easy to go, well, women should give me sex. And I exist in the world kind of as this island where I'm just moving around and people are here for my own, as like a means to an end for my own use, right?
Yeah.
Um, you can't feel coming from that space. It's like, there's you're cut off from empathy, you're cut off from compassion, you're cut off from um, the vulnerability of relating and the fact that it's inherently uncomfortable and vulnerable to be in relationship and you can't have control over the whole thing. It's to be truly intimate, you let go of control. Um, and I don't think it's just incels that are having this issue. I think it's on a spectrum, right? Like incels would be like the example of the extreme version of this. But there is something going on with men that is, a lot of men I've encountered have some iteration of this going on.
Yeah, I mean, I would not doubt that. And again, I was not talking about only incels having
Yeah.
this thing. Um, um,
I didn't think you were, but I just wanted to be clear
yeah, no,
for
that's
my end
cool.
and for the person listening. Yeah.
Sure, sure. No, that's totally understandable. And the I mean, God, we touched so many issues already that is would be worth going in individually. One thing that I once heard from a woman, if a man really wants a woman in a good sense of the word now, um, then it's more likely that she falls for him. Okay, what she meant by this was I just noticed that it comes across a little bit different when I'm saying it in English, but it was a German woman that told me that. And that back in the days, that was an enlightenment for me because I thought back then, okay, man, how do I do it? How can I get in contact with women? How do I find a partner? And all that stuff. Mm. And when she said that, it made total sense to me in the very moment. And it's, of course, let's start with this one. It was not meant, if you really want her, just take her. That would be the extreme incel attitude. She has to. No. What this woman wanted to say was, if your intent and your intention is like honest and you're with all your heart want that woman because you love her so much,
Yeah.
because your emotions are just honest and strong and open. Of course, this when the woman said it, this implies that she is getting the message, right? And I'm getting in a second why this is so important. So if he comes across with this very clearly, very openly, very misunderstandably, then the woman is touched.
Mhm.
And then I mean, she was putting it a little bit like, okay, there's no way out anymore. Of course, there needs to be some mutual interest, but now here's the point that is important, and it brings me back to what I was stating earlier, which is um, if the guy cannot be in contact with the other person, if there's no empathy in everything, then of course this also can never happen. If you're not in contact with the other person, you cannot get across with this idea, I really want you. This is honest. I'm serious. I'm falling for you with everything that's there. And and um, and I believe that at the core of what we're talking here about today is this inability of being emotional, and and even worse so when I look at the incel community, like, and we're just using those guys as what Max Weber, the German sociologist, would consider as an ideal type. So they're like they're the from the theoretical perspective the perfect stereotype of this kind of guys, right?
Yeah.
So these guys, what they're doing is not only they're blaming the world for that nothing's happening, and then they have this really weird understanding of they're entitled to anything, but mostly, but on top of this, they are actually perpetuating it um, and increasing it, amplifying it in a sense. Because when you're sitting at home and isolating yourself, because I'm pretty sure when you're blaming other people of being isolated, that also implies that you are not doing anything against your isolation. So you're sitting inside and getting even more frustrated. And with all due respect, of course, if you're like in this referring, perpetuating situation, I'm not surprised that extreme ideas come out of those kind of guys' heads,
Yeah,
because they're not being fed anymore with other than their own worldview. And
exactly.
then on top comes something else, which is, I believe, and this is why I came up with this example from that woman. If a man really wants a girl, he gets her. Um, I believe that these guys are mostly thinking of, yeah, I'm gonna fuck those influencer girls on Instagram. So in other words, they're aiming also in areas where, yeah, I mean, they'll probably never get to. I mean, like I'm never gonna get to, even if I find those ladies also attractive. But my point is that when you're, it's basically a total different ball game, but same mechanism. What happens with girls when they're being confronted with how they're supposed to look like? So there's a huge pressure on girls to be attractive, all this makeup stuff, plastic surgery, you name it. I don't need to get into this. It's another topic. But the same thing of understanding, like, okay, oh, these are the girls that are out there. These are the trophy wives that I need to have. Then of course pressure is up for the guys also. And of course you feel like being excluded if you're not in bed with the supermodel every other day. In their heads, of course. And I'm wondering how strong this conviction actually is. I mean, it might not be. I'm pretty sure, actually, it's not consciously there for them. They just believe they need to get these trophy wives or something like this,
Well,
which feeds into their frustration.
yeah, I mean, I'm seeing too how, when you become when we become really isolated and we're kind of living in our own virtual world, um, and we're very disconnected from actual women, and we're just really tuned into how to derive a sense of self-worth from fitting with society's model that's given to us about how to do that. um, it can get so distorted that there's safety, there's almost like this, there's a double thing going on here. Like on one hand, there's deep frustration about not getting that and a deep sense of entitlement and anger. But I don't think we're talking about the fact that men derive safety from getting caught in these ideals too. Because it's safer to live in a world where you have these very set ideas about the roles of men and women and what women are good for. And you reduce not only women, but men to being more caricatures of themselves, right? You reduce the complexity. And um, where you're imagining these interactions that don't contain this nuance of like intense emotion, many different intense emotions, or don't contain like the the complication of uh, sex being a relational process and relationship being like something you don't have control over, that requires like a level of skill, and there's always a risk of failure, right? Like instead there's some safety in going like, in reducing it to, this is the game I need to play in order to seduce a woman, get sex from her, and then leave. Like, it's, again, it's removing yourself from the vulnerability or the chance of failure on a relational level, or having it be confirmed that you're not developed well enough. If it's just about like get in, get out, like
Sure.
seduce, have sex, be done, or even just imagining that, right?
Yeah. But let's I may want to
And I'm not just talking about incels. I
yeah,
think I think
I
men
was
derive safety by reducing interactions between themselves and women to um I having this sense of entitlement and just looking for sex and just wanting to get with the most socially, the woman that has the highest social value, where they can get status from having, you know, been associated with her and
yeah.
made sex with her.
Yeah, sure. But thanks for pointing out again that we're not specifically talking about incels because we can't. Why can't we talk about incels? Because those guys do not go out and date women. Because if they would, if yeah, I mean this is the thing where I'm not really sure about the concept of the incel because if they're really isolated, if they're only staying
Right.
inside and radicalizing them in those ideas, then there wouldn't be any harm for women in the sense of what they're doing. I mean, the ideas have spilled over, yeah, right. But
Yeah.
that's something else. So the actual incel as the ideal type, he's not seeing any woman. He's going into the truck and driving down the pedestrian precinct, the mall, and running over people.
Well, I think
That's their
incels
social
as a
content.
God, that's so dark. Um,
Well, it is. It is a
okay.
social. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
sociology
it's a
speaking,
really
it's a
distorted
social
form.
it's a social relation between the amok guy and his
Yeah.
victims. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, is like incels as a community are not a monolith, right? Like, I see that within the incel community, there's a spectrum of people that are like heavily radicalized, that ascribe to like red pill, blue pill ideology, um, or black pill ideology. And then those that are like, hey, can we just talk about the fact that we're isolated and our mental health isn't very good, and like how to improve ourselves, right? So we've got, because I've encountered folks that are like, I am an incel, but I'm not so radicalized that I just, I ascribe to this sense of needing to have to completely objectify and exploit women. And, I don't hate women, but I just feel a lot of pain that women don't seem to want me. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
I
yeah,
was just yeah, I understand. I understand. The thing that I want to point out again is this opening up thing because what we're talking about is that, and I think it makes perfect sense why they're isolating themselves or think that they're like here are the different roles because everything in the end what we're talking about, Ava, I believe boils down to the it's like a funnel that goes to the point where these guys will not confront themselves with their emotional being.
ding, 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 ding. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Like, it
mean,
comes down to trauma, right? Like, we
yeah,
haven't used that
exactly.
word yet, but it's like, there's
Exactly.
an issue here about people being heavily traumatized and like not addressing their trauma, like
Yeah.
not going into their emotions, like not doing that deeper healing work.
Exactly. Which would be a almost consequential side effect, right? Because what we're talking about in the first place is merely, hey, be strong enough or have the courage to open up. Have the courage to open up because only if you're opening up, you can connect with the other person. Of course, you can only open up if you're in contact with yourself.
Yeah.
And so, if I may come back just briefly to
Yeah.
this thing, if a man really wants a woman, then he wins her
Mhm.
over. And this is, I think, in essence, what we're talking about: inner beauty. Because then you're showing yourself like this is me as a person. these are my emotions, that's how I'm reacting, and so forth. And by this, you're showing yourself, and this is has always been attractive throughout the centuries, right? Because you're not playing a role, you're not superficial, and so forth. So these guys, and this is why it's so easy. I think it makes perfect sense to me, at least. This is why it's so easy to explain why they're going down that path, because it's the same like compensation. It's just a very
Hmm.
specific way of compensating. And you can either you play video games, or you go shopping, or you go into this whole addiction road, down that addiction road by compensating, through which you are compensating your inner pain,
Hmm.
or you're bringing in some, and this is very obvious. I mean, when I look at those points, you're bringing in a framework of rational ideas, because that's what it is. Saying I'm entitled for a woman is an idea. It's not given from by nature.
Yeah.
Um, and in order to explain yourself and numb the pain by basically playing back the ball into the other part of the court and saying it's your fault.
Yeah.
I have nothing to do with it. So what they're basically doing is, I mean, on a very superficial level already, they're saying, um, uh, it's not my fault. You guys are the assholes, and I don't have to do shit. And this is of course, that can only be negative, because they will never, nothing will change. In fact, just worse. They will perpetuate, and I'm repeating myself. I stated it earlier. They will self referentially increase their attitude up to a radical point of view, and of course never meet a woman in the first place.
Yeah. Or,
So
when they meet a woman, they engage in ways of acting that turns this woman off,
sure.
and it ends
Exactly.
pretty quickly.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, and these are the guys that then cause those very negative experiences for women. But for the guys, of course, it's safe, but only from one perspective, and that is, I do not have to get into contact with my emotions if I'm doing this. Then
Yeah.
I'm safe from that. I'm saved from my own inner world, so to say.
Yeah. Why are men so scared of their inner world? Like, what
Yeah,
is,
that's a very good question. I think, and now here, we talked about a lot of biology, but here definitely socialization comes into play, and
yeah.
big time. And of course, that is, so socialization would be the macro level in terms of how whole generations are being treated like this. Also on the macro level would be the trauma experience, which of course plays directly into the socialization. And
Mhm.
what I mean by this, we've touched this also in previous talks. In Germany, very apparent, World War II has never been worked through, never been talked about. There was no collective healing on that level. What when it comes to psychological trauma, and um, and so we have a first war generation that is basically emotionally unavailable, which
Mhm.
raise kids, the so-called 68ers in Germany,
Mhm.
which are basically the equivalent of the counterculture movement in the United States. And these guys had also pretty weird ideas. I mean,
Mhm.
even up to sex with 14-year-olds, because they thought this whole concept is wrong.
Mhm.
Anyways, my point being, secondary trauma, these guys all had parents that were not emotionally available. They had their issues with this one, passed that on to their children. Now we're probably into the fourth generation now after World War II in Germany. So this is the background for the trauma.
Yeah.
And then we have all those stereotypes, that male, you know, don't show your feelings, always be strong, have a solution for everything, stuff like this.
Yeah.
And I think the trauma is probably the actual background for this, because all these things can easily, I mean, at least when you look at it from that perspective, you can say all these things can easily be used as a means to not go and get into your emotions. If you always have to be strong, if you're down, uh, um, I just watched the video Heat recently, where the role of Robert De Niro says like, yeah, you know, just have stuff that you can leave like within 30 minutes flat. So disappear. I mean, he's a gangster in that movie, so he needs to be flexible on that department. But emotionally, same thing. You know, ah, no, don't get too involved. It might be too hurtful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, I find it like I look at my own family history and I look at
Yeah.
um, the ways that trauma has been passed down through generation, both in the men and the women. And like I see a critical point where in our in our development through generations, there's a way that self-awareness or an ability to like reflect on itself starts to awaken, right? And there's something shifts and someone goes, I want to make the choice to not be the way that people before me have been, right? I'm going to now do the work. I'm now going to go inward. And I see that when there's a lot of social environments or contexts where we are given the power to not have to self-reflect, or when we are granted a pass from self-reflection, or when we don't have something that motivates us to have to self-reflect because the world around us adjusts, then we don't, right? Like because I look at myself and I'm like, there are some distinct ways that I've chosen, despite the immense amount of trauma in my family and even trauma that I have from childhood, early childhood especially. I got to a point where I was like, I need to be accountable for myself. I need to connect with myself. I need to heal. I need to relate to the world where I'm not blaming anyone or everyone for what my experience is. But that was there's like a set of things that needed to come together for me to go, this is the only way for me to proceed.
Mm.
Um, Maybe it was feelings of powerlessness and realizing like having a glimpse of what my impact is in the world when I'm not accountable for myself, and some enough connection being online internally where I was like, oh, I'm causing harm and I don't want to cause harm anymore. Right. Like, um, but I look at men on a large scale and I'm going, okay, if there's lots of socialization that's contributing to them being this way, as well as trauma, what is going on with the men that do decide to do the self-reflection, to connect with themselves, to stop relating from this place of entitlement, or uh, to just finally open up to want to connect with their emotions, right? Like what, and I don't know if it's, yeah, I don't really quite know. I've got ideas, as you can hear me say. But I look at some of the men that I've dated, um, where they, despite causing so much harm in their lives, like so much drama in their lives. And I can see this when they talk about their past relationships or what they're generating in their own life in other relationships besides the connection with me, or looking at the way that they interact with me, where it's like, oh my gosh, they're creating so many more problems than if they were just open, right? It's almost easier to be open than to do what they're doing, right? Um, but
Yeah.
obviously they haven't come to a place of realizing the necessity of being open yet, right? Like, but there's men who have. So it's
Well, maybe you're
yeah,
underestimating the pain they're looking into. I mean, it's
yeah.
I cannot really I I've been always very straightforward with or within my therapies. In fact, one therapist once gave me feedback that he's never had a patient that was like so determined to go where where it's hurting. um, and I mean, I took that as a compliment back then, but at the same time, I thought, well, the pain is so high and strong on the other hand, which means the reason why I went into therapy was um, um, there was so much suffering. So I wanted to have a solution on that end. So what I'm saying is, when I said earlier, it's easier to do it. Easier compared to what? It's easier than bearing the pain that you might look into. I mean, this is really, I hate all this talk about, oh, I'm leaving my comfort zone when there's like a successful guy. I'm leaving my comfort. You're not leaving your comfort zone. Come on. I mean, you just whatever took on a new TV show that you haven't done before and say you're leaving your comfort zone. That's still comfortable because how hard would you fall? You know what I'm saying? But going into these emotions, this is actually leaving the comfort zone. It's so uncomfortable to be there that they do not want to be there no matter what. I rather become addicted to alcohol or shopping or sports or whatever, or to a weird conspiracy theory than going into those pains. So, I mean, it sounds very easy. Of course, it's always individually different, but the bottom line would be apparently the pain they believe to look into. I mean, of course, there is one. I'm not denying this, but they're thinking it's going to destroy them, right? But it's not. That's what they don't get. But this is something we can get into after that. So the pain they believe they would be looking into is higher than all the other problems that they're causing on that end, which they might not even be so aware of. But it's definitely higher and therefore easier to do anything else.
I mean, I feel kind of at the core of this, outside of the anger I've had to work through in regard to dealing with men and this like really poor behavior I've put up with as a part of even trying to date them. I feel sad. Like, I feel sad considering that, like, so many men are being extremely destructive in their own lives and with themselves because
Sure.
they're scared of dealing with their emotions.
Yeah. I mean, it is sad. I mean, when I look, God, I mean, so many ideas. When I look at this list or this ideal type of incel, which of course, like I said, or like we agreed on that we're just using it as a stereotype, but it counts for a lot of other guys. It is sad because when I look at when I look at these points, I'm immediately have the imagination of a guy. Okay, there's a guy sitting in the basement in front of his computer, and there's a pizza and a Coca-Cola standing next to him, and he's playing video games, and that's all the thing he's doing 24/7. That's the picture I'm getting. I'm not saying it's correct, but what I'm saying is there's definitely a poor, lonely person that has apparently dug himself into a hole so deep that it's getting harder and harder to get out of every day that's coming.
Yeah.
And this is might also play into the whole thing. Why are we having more male um, homeless people on the street than women? Why is this?
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I know why it is because we know that women are acting differently. But the question is, why are the men acting differently than the women? The women are more active in looking for another partner and trying to find a new partner, and that's why we don't see them. And they're looking for situations where they don't end up on the street because they feel it's that's what I remember at least from the top of my head. But men just like let it go. That's just no, I'm almost like no, let me be the victim. And I know of cases, I've seen in documentaries and stuff that some men even refuse help to get off of the street. They refuse it. They don't want it anymore. And it is also one background thing that most of those guys who are homeless have been left by their women back then. They lost the relationship, and that was the beginning. Shortly after this, they ended up on the street. I'm not saying that women are responsible for the
Yeah.
for the homeless.
Yeah.
I'm saying that apparently this ability of being in a relationship and so forth seems to be crucial also when it comes to letting yourself go or not. And of course, I mean,
Yeah.
ending up on the street, if it is this, of course, there are definitely other reasons why you end up on the street, especially in the States.
Yeah.
But I believe the core thing is a very sad
Yeah.
circumstance. I totally agree.
And I mean, I think I look at the, if we just look at like birth rates and what's going on with dating around different countries in the world, and hetero dating, that is, and or hetero looking dating, right? It's
Yeah,
not to say that if I date a man, I'm necessarily hetero, but you know what I mean here. Um, I'm seeing all these trends of like women going into celibacy. I myself have done that. Like I'm seeing trends in cultures where people have just stopped dating in general. Like there are all these countries that are coming up with like ways to intervene because their birth rate is going down. And I do think that this partially has to do with what's going on with men. Like it's not completely, there's another thing going on with women. But I do see, even women giving up dating entirely. Like this is a
mm,
trend of like boy sober. That's like become a trending thing. And because women are like, I'm not putting up with this behavior anymore. Like, I'm not putting up with men who don't know how to form connections, who don't have relationships in their lives that are holding them accountable and encouraging them to practice social skills and vulnerability, like who
mm.
are living in their own little world and are exploitative and refuse to grow up emotionally. Um, and it makes me really sad thinking, my goodness, like, where are we going with this, right? Like,
Hmm.
if a man is so caught in his trauma and is so mired in refusing to have the vulnerability of being open and accepting help and connecting with anybody on that deeper level, that he's willing to become homeless and lose everything and just go into this like dissociative addictive space, or maybe even psychosis. Like I'm not really sure what's going on with folks who end up um, homeless.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, what is going on that men are choosing the route of this getting into this fantasy world or completely being isolated and completely disconnecting versus choosing connection. Because it's going in the direction of like, I mean, I really do think that it's contributing to like screwing up attachment relations between women and men. It's screwing up the capacity for like creating societies that have steady birth rates. Like it's, like this is disturbing.
Sure. I mean, the um I was just wondering if there might be some light at the end of the tunnel when I look at younger generations with, I mean, first of all, I would say, at least it's what I'm experiencing, that there definitely is a sensitivity there now for uh, gender equalization and everything, so that equal chances, equal opportunities, equal pay, and
Yeah.
so forth. So it's, I mean, it's there. The whole gender debate made people more sensitive about it. I'm not saying that it's like changing, or I mean, it has already, a lot of things have already changed.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, you know, the situation to me at least looks like this. So here are the women who are definitely the victim of a totally deranged and incapable group of men approaching them.
Yeah.
And these men that are causing trouble for these women are in turn victim of a situation that they, I'm pretty sure, are not even aware of. They're not aware of it. And I'm not saying that they're not responsible for being dicks to women. Okay, that's not my point. But if you want to put it into yeah, haha. If you want to bring it into a causal relation, what's in the beginning? So in the beginning is basically a um, a society that does not help them to get in contact with themselves and work through their shit or be actually, I mean, it's not like this, you know, and they're like, okay, I'm so lucky I just worked through my shit. It's of course an ongoing thing. It's something that you have to learn and it will never end because you will always be confronted with stuff that's going on with things that you're probably not acting perfectly because we aren't
Yeah.
all perfect.
Yeah.
And of course, you might encounter stuff in your lifetime that
Yeah.
might cause some trouble that you then have to deal with. And either you're dealing with it, which means working through it, sorting it out, or you compensating. This is just a two-fork road, right? It's a
Yeah.
one-fork road. It's just either or that. Either you're going to compensate and then you're denying it, or
Yeah.
you're going through it and then you're accepting it. There's one point where you make this decision. Of course, you can like flip back and forth in along the way by saying like, okay, now here I'm not really reflecting on this because I have to, first of all, maybe I have to put it on hold because I'm really in a stressful situation. I have to write an exam tomorrow,
Yeah.
and so I cannot deal with it. Okay, but you're aware of it and you're capable of doing it, right?
Yeah.
But these guys, they're not capable. That's why I'm saying they're a victim, because the capability is something that they should have been taught by
Yeah.
their parents, by their social environment and everything, and then of course pass it on to other people. And then even worse, they're not being confronted with getting there because nobody tells them, yeah, hey, you know, it's actually really good when you're in contact with your emotions because, and now here's the surprise, surprise, you might actually then find a woman because of this. This is what those guys are not seeing at all.
And you'll have plenty of sex, and it'll be much more nourishing than like a one night stand, weird, manipulative thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might also have one night stands, but then at
Yeah.
least you know what you're going into,
It won't be
and you
manipulative.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It will be consensual one night stand, and it will be something where you're very sure what's going on, and you will be able to ask a woman, "Hey, what do you think? Is this gonna go on for another time, or what do you want?" Right? I mean, it's not that women always just want. I mean, okay, first of all, women are not the better human beings. Yeah. Okay. I understand why
Well,
you
I
have to
mean,
think about this.
I think, no, there's so many things I really deeply love and appreciate about men and what they bring. Because I mean, I do think we are fundamentally different. Like I do think there's a biological factor here. I don't think
Of
it's just
course.
socialization.
Yeah.
And I mean, this gets into the whole conversation of, well, what about gender fluidity and, gender expression? And I
Sure. But
recognize like it gets
yeah.
very complicated. Um, but I mean, I think if we look at just, we back up and stop looking at it in terms of gender or sex and just look at rungs of power and groups that are afforded more privilege and power according to different things that have happened in history, in imperialism, colonialism, um, just capitalism,
Mm,
these larger isms um, that have contributed to the certain rungs of power being in place or certain layers of power being in place attributed, like given to certain people, privilege based on just being born in a certain time, body, place, right? With a
mm,
certain ability. I think power being given power and not being checked in your power does have a developmental impact where we're less likely to question ourselves and more likely to assume my experience is the normal experience or the right experience, and the other person who's has less power is the wrong one. And it's just, as humans, we depend on that. Like it's almost easier to defer to um, the person with less power holding more responsibility. So, like we're a white man and a white woman talking here, and it's like
Hmm.
this argument of are women better than men? I think we could just look at, okay, well, are people of color better than white people? And I think in some ways, developmentally, they are more in connection with the reality of how the world works, because of having to deal with um, that element of living, the imbalance of power in the ways that white people project all over them and uh, uh, exploit their power, their
Hmm.
privilege and their power. And I think the more layers in which we experience oppression, I do think gives us an opportunity to self-reflect more so and to have no choice but to go inward and go, is this me? This might be me,
Sure.
right? And when you've got men who are at the top in a lot of ways, and I'm making it very simple because men also have ways in which they experience many men ways they experience oppression too. But looking at like a white hetero man who comes from a middle class or upper class family, has been given all the opportunities, I think that type of person is much less likely to self-reflect than somebody who is not able-bodied, who is not hetero, who did not grow up in a wealthy or well-to-do or financially capable family in whatever way. Um, so it's I have a question about like the men who are most entitled that we're talking about, and like how many points of feeling powerless have they experienced in their lives that have helped them finally go inward and go, I have to deal with my pain, right? Rather
Hmm.
than making everybody else responsible for it.
Sure.
So, in some ways, I do feel like that question of like, are women better? I think it's more like, do women perceive reality in a more nuanced way? Maybe, because they've had that extra challenge,
Yeah.
like having to self-reflect, having not being in positions where they have power to determine what's going to happen next, or they are oppressed in a certain way. Just like I think some of the most, well, it goes in two directions, right? Depending on the trauma you have, you can become extremely distorted in your perception of reality and
Hmm.
super stuck in like a really uh, trauma-based perception of reality, or you have access to like very clearly seeing things that people who are in more powerful positions don't see, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And when I brought up the women are not the better human beings, that was actually more an ironic remark at
Oh,
that
I
point.
know, but it just inspired that thought process for me. It's
Yeah,
like,
no, it's totally fine, and I think it pointed out the also the other side of that same medal, which is that men are given much more opportunities to compensate
yeah,
through power. I mean, we
yeah,
had put down the I yeah, I put down this talking point, compensating through money. Men pay everything, men give
mhm,
gifts, blah blah blah. So this whole ego issue,
mhm,
and of course it's hard for us to imagine this, but because it's around for so long. But I would easily say it's worth going down that train of thought of the history of advantages for males exclusively. So what do I mean by this? I mean, look at the different contexts of power, and usually it's I would say, a 9-to-1 ratio of male and men and women. So look at the Forbes list of billionaires. I think I don't know, I think it's just like 10%. That's why I think why I come up with 9-to-1. But the amount of women in the top 10, I think there's just, I think there is none.
Yeah.
Or maybe oh no, no, no. I think there's the Chanel heir, Betoncourt. I think she's the only one who's in the top 10 as a woman. But then I mean, you getting my point. Same thing with politics.
Yeah.
So a lot more men in there. So the interesting thing now, of course, is where does this come from? And it's a very, very difficult issue, and a lot of men would probably say, "Well, that's just how we are. It's just natural." I mean, okay, I can understand the argument, and of course, like I said, biology does play a role. It definitely does play a role. I'm not against it,
Yeah.
but being a sociologist, I'm also critical of if it's the only reason and mostly if it explains it all. And
Yeah.
I doubt this because it's it's imaginable, but hard, like I said, but it's imaginable that there could be a different world where men are being socialized differently, or where there are some other outlets
Yeah.
for, where to put all this testosterone, if not in the stock market or in cars or in whatever sports competition,
Yeah.
stuff like this. Or yeah, what I'm saying.
Something
And
just occurred to me, and
pardon me?
I'm interrupting you. Something just occurred to me that to add to this.
Sure.
Um, I see that the more power you have, the more isolated you get, or the more isolation you have the capacity to create for yourself. Like if you have access to different ways to compensate, or if you have the option to remove yourself from society, people tend to do that because it feels comfortable. You can choose the comfortable route of avoiding the emotion rather than dealing with the harsh reality of interaction and engagement. So with more power through gender, or more power through ability, like able-bodiedness, or more power through money. And I see this a lot, like a lot of, for instance, studies that talk about really wealthy people. And that there's a point in where the perspective of really wealthy people changes, where instead of seeing themselves as people who've benefited from privilege or the help of other people, they tend to look at it like they were either very lucky, or that they got there as purely from their own hard work. And
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
this tendency to divorce oneself from like how much you're a product
Structural
of,
reasons.
yeah, of your environment or nepotism or what have you. And your perception becomes a lot more about self and about like me being the central focus, or me. And
Sure.
it's there
Yeah.
is like, I think with power, if you have control, if you have more control because of your power for compensation to avoid your emotions, I think people naturally choose that. It's more comfortable. And
Yeah.
it further disconnects you from people, and further disconnects you from entering into contexts where you'll get a hit of reality, right? You can sort of form your own alternate reality. And even this experience with incels, like, you can't be an incel if you have to work a job out in the world
Yeah.
and deal with lots of different people. Like, you just can't. There's some level of privilege to be an incel and sort of feed these ideas and hang out in this realm. And you have to actually exert quite a lot of effort to like go out into the world and interact with other human beings
Yeah.
and maintain this position, right?
Yeah.
Usually it's like there's some sense of power or wealth that allows somebody, or privilege that allows somebody
Yeah.
to maintain that position. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that just occurred to me with what you were saying. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
it's
it's all good. It's all good. I mean, basically, we're we're depicting here a picture that that hard makes it really hard for men to see a way out there. Because so first of all, there's biology, there's this hunting drive, there's this like, I don't give a shit because I just want this climactic experience and feel good about it, and then next hunt, next prey. Then we have the psychological point where they're reluctant to go where the pain is.
Yeah.
So this fear of getting into emotion makes it difficult. And then there's a sociological perspective that basically, because they're so absorbed in their privileged way that they don't even see how these structures put them into the situation, and they just legitimizing it even more. And this is probably one of the basic frameworks that then lead to those super rich who totally lost control, contact with like everything. I mean, these
Yeah.
guys, I'm pretty sure they have no idea of what's going on actually, and how the average guy is living and what the problems are there. And I
And
think
no
if you
empathy
want to,
about it either.
pardon me?
No empathy about it either. Like,
No empathy
you're
about
in
it
your
either.
situation because of something you've done, right?
Sure, but you just came up with the point that they don't even see it anymore.
Yeah.
They already believe that the reasons are somewhere else. And if you want to have an extreme and totally grotesque a depiction of that one, you just need to look at Elon Musk, who
Yeah.
apparently has not the slightest sane understanding of what democracy is actually all about. I mean,
Yes.
he fucks it up backwards with just like this, and not even realizing it, not even realizing it, and then coming up with some. I mean, he came up with so stupid bottom lines of what freedom of speech is and something like this, where he apparently, I mean, it's so obviously gave himself away as just an imbecile when it comes to democratic what's the word? Discourse structures or setups. Yeah.
Well, okay, so if we do end this on a light at the end of the tunnel, positive outlook.
Yeah, that's what you wish.
Um,
What is it? I'm curious because I mean, what I just said looks pretty dark, huh?
I mean,
Actually, I mean, there is one light at the end of the
okay.
tunnel, but
Okay.
it is, of course, it comes from somewhere else, and we already touched it briefly. The light at the end of the tunnel is a promise to these kind of guys, to these male that basically depicting or acting out an attitude and behavior that
Mhm,
is can be found in the extremes forms what incels are talking about.
mhm.
And it is that it is worth going through the pain, the inner pain, for your personal benefit in the first place. It is really worth it. So it is, in fact, I mean, if this saying "no pain, no gain" has ever meant something, it is this context.
Yeah.
Here, the pain really gains you a lot, and it means it gains you inner peace. It
Yeah.
gains you, for that matter, also more outer peace, because you can then read the room better. You can contact with your surroundings much better.
Yeah.
Um, it gains you um, the ability to approach people. It probably also gains you the self-esteem to approach people because you know better who you are.
Yeah.
It also gains you on the long run, and this is what we're coming from the issue of the talk, contact to the other sex, or that sex that you're interested in. And it then eventually would gain you, if that all goes well, a positive experience with that person.
Yeah.
And so this would be the light at the end of the tunnel. And what we depicted now was all the
Yeah.
the thresholds that are out there,
Yeah.
the three thresholds: biological,
Yeah.
psychological, and sociological thresholds,
Yeah.
which are really hard to overcome. I'm not saying it's easy.
Yeah.
This is what darkens the whole picture. But there's a promise, and this is not just a light promise or event maybe. No, it's definitely there, but you
Yeah.
have to go through it. You have to go through it.
Yeah. I mean, we really need each other. Like that's where I see the light at the end of the tunnel is like, we cannot sustain this. Like at some point, it's going to get so critical, and women and men are going to be so like deeply separated from each other. Maybe it needs to get really, really bad, worse than it's ever gotten, for us to learn more about how much we deeply need each other. And not only do we deeply need each other for connection and for learning and for creating
Yeah.
society together, but like for creating children. But we're getting into now technologies maybe might create children without even needing genes from a man and a woman, and it might get in
AI
that direction,
fabricated
right?
genes.
But I do suspect, like at some point, we're going to realize that we really deeply need each other, and maybe right now women are learning a lot about how to value themselves more and how to like set boundaries and um, needing to take that time to do that deeper work because they're also experiencing
Sure.
disillusionment with dating men, right? And men and women are kind of going through their own unique version of getting isolated and going into very difficult places because they need to learn, like, oh, as a part of needing others, I have to do my deeper work.
Yeah.
And but that includes women, right? I'm not saying all women just do their deeper work, but like we're all learning together, maybe. Like we got to stop bypassing this stuff.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what's going on. I don't know. That's the
I mean,
maybe.
it's definitely something that is not only a task for men. I mean, when I remember what we talked about in the dating app talk, that was our first talk.
Mhm.
Um, we also touched the issue of women not being able to connect
Yeah,
in a
of
dating situation. So of course we have also traumatized women out there
course.
for other reasons than dating experiences, and of course it's also hard for them. But the big difference is of course the privilege that the wired man is in, or can benefit from, makes it easier for him to just stay in that realm and go down the path of compensation.
Yeah,
And of course, it's really hard. And I mean, like I said, I'm repeating myself partly. It's really hard to get out of this circle or
yeah,
out of this dynamic because I mean, imagine your average rich kid who's so full of himself that he thinks he can buy the world literally, and try to reach him on that point of like, hey, dude, you need to get in contact with your emotions.
yeah,
I mean, he's just like, fuck it, I'm gonna buy a Ferrari, and okay, there he goes. I mean,
yeah,
it's the everyday, I think, experience with every kindergarten teacher,
yeah,
psychotherapist. Like, okay, man, okay, this guy's not ready. He's just not
yeah,
ready. And they
yeah,
can, and as long, I mean, this is the actual downside of the whole thing. As long there is no real hard pressure because of suffering,
yeah.
they're not gonna do it.
Thank goodness.
Compensating goes a long way.
Yeah. Thank goodness, though, life is full of tragedy. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's,
Maybe
I
we should
mean,
end there.
yeah,
Thank goodness, life is.
says the one who wants to end on a good note,
Yeah,
coming with a very cynical
yeah.
comment.
Thank you for having this talk with me today, Chris.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So, yeah, we need to get to an end.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Yes. See you next time.
My pleasure. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
No time